Well, now we are all met. We can begin our session. A few technical tweaks. Useful? Necessary?
Yes.
Yeah. Done?
Always.
Welcome to this afternoon's session, Can Farming and Food Traders Weather the Economic Storm, which is the $64 million question. My name is Anita McNaught. I have skin in the game, but the biggest stories are from my panelists, who are all here with the exception of Caron, who will be coming up a little bit later because she has some more slides to present, and it's useful for her to do that from the lectern. It's scant comfort that we are all, farming and non-farming, worldwide, caught up in this economic maelstrom, that we have all been whacked by the same pandemic. We're all being whacked by the same warming world, because the people gathered here in Oxford this week are a group of people who have always tried to do the right thing, to act in the common interest, in the planet's interest, often at great personal sacrifice, and it's just got harder. So how do we get through this? We've got a variety of voices here coming from different perspectives, all of whom will have stories of endurance, resilience, some suggestions for getting through the tougher times. Martin Lyons, on my far right, of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Mark Thomas, of the Farming Community Network. Phil Haughton, of Better Foods, Bristol. Jade Bashford, of the Real Farming Trust and the Stroud Brewery. Caron Whaley, who will be up with us in a minute. And Kim Brooks, Managing Director of The Community Farm. Martin, if I could start with you. Arable farmer in Cambridge, lover of trees. In your hands, a report about how nature means business, but does business mean nature? How do we get through this awful transition period where so many people are paying extortionately for trying to help the country move towards the right policies?
Thank you. Nature does mean business, and if we put nature in the heart of our businesses and our systems, the way we work our landscape, that's where we may become the most profitable and sustainable going forward. We've seen crisis after crisis over the last few years, and it's really culminated this year around Ukraine and the energy crisis, and that has really impacted tremendous amount of businesses. But the ones that have really been affected are the ones that are on the high output, high input, high borrowing, and that has really caused them immense pressures. Yet we know many people in this room and across the UK that they've been changing their businesses over many years and becoming more resilient and reliable and able to weather those storms. But as we look at the crises that have been facing us all, we've got crises around the government policy, the inaction and the turbulence around government. We don't actually know what our future policies are going to be and how we know what's coming away, particularly in England, but it's changing across the UK. But what's going to be replaced? How does society support land management and food production in a joined-up way? How does our supply chains play their responsible role in making sure that the products we produce as farmers have a positive impact to the landscape, not a negative impact, but also to society and communities and to our own businesses? And how do we manage those ever-increasing costs? And actually, it's about putting nature back into the heart of the system. A business that's built on fossil fuel and input costs are always going to be vulnerable to the vagaries of markets and the costs that come in. And we've actually seen tremendous pressure this last year from the industry, from our wider industry and from community, from farmers, magazines, because it's suddenly about food production, food security, increasing outputs, raising the concern that farming's only about producing food. But the reality that we see that less than 20% of our productive soil produces food that feeds us. Over 60% of the grains that we produce feed livestock. Many of those livestock could be outside. Actually, we need to rethink our food system and actually put that nature back into the heart of it and balance our production, and which will balance our systems. And it actually balances our hearts and minds and our stomachs, and we actually become, I think, better citizens and more in touch with our landscapes. And within my role of the network, I've managed to communicate to farmers and talk to farmers right across the UK. Many of them have questions and they're not sure what to do. They're all on different parts of that journey. And it's finding out how can we help as an industry and as farmers and other organisations to pick them up and lift them, give them confidence, give them answers to their questions. Sometimes we haven't got the answers. but we can give them a bit of support in trying to send them in a direction to make them better. And we've certainly heard all this noise that's going on around food production, and the reality that actually we want food, not just security, but sovereignty. We want more value of the food that we produce as farmers to get to the public. And actually we recognise many public do want to buy from good sources, do actually understand where their food comes from, and how can we help them communicate that? And how do we help connect to society and that bits around what we do? And as I said, with the Nature Friendly Farming Network and others, it's that how do we put nature at the heart of our businesses? How do we think our food systems and rethink our food production about that multi-valuable asset that we have, which is our landscape, and stack enterprises, look at different opportunities, don't focus around single commodity outputs that leave little value left on our farm and big risks within our businesses. And food security depends on nature. Unless we put nature back in the heart of our production, we won't have food security. So all this noise that we hear about increasing production for food security, it is complete rubbish. And it's how do we, all of us, undermine that message. And I've just been in a meeting with the Minister, and he understands it. And it's how do they help move the policy and the framework and the supply chain, but give the confidence to farmers to understand what the role society wants them to do in the future in adjusting their bits. And we know many farmers, and many in this room and right across the UK, have transitioned their businesses to a more regenerative, a more nature-friendly kind of system that has stripped many of those costs out. They've had big concerns because much of the system has changed and there's been crisis, but they haven't been buying expensive fertiliser bills. They haven't been using high amounts of energy and resource. So they're actually able to weather the storm better. It still impacts them, still having real impacts to their mental health, their physical health, their ability to weather the storm. But it also, they are the ones that are going to bounce back quickest. They are the ones that have the ability to see the bigger picture, I think, and think about that diverse landscape and the opportunity of different products, different ways of connecting with supply chains, with communities, public access, and thinking about how do we generate different incomes and revenues that can underpin that volatility in supply chains in what we do. But I will go on to, I think there's a lot of hope. There are so many organisations and farmers, and many of them here and many across the UK, that are really trying to help support farmers and producers do things differently. Give them the answers. It's not about signing up and paying for advice. There's lots of amazing people out there willing to give supporting advice, just to support from farmers and from other organisations. And we've seen it today, we're hearing many of the sessions. People are there to make things better and try and help the system work. And I think it's up to all of us to go out to our communities and to our neighbours and to friends and see how we can help them. Because our farming is very isolated sometimes, and the pressures that are outside, if you don't leave your own farm, become too much sometimes. And it's really important that we all reach out to people and connect. So I think if the farmers in this room, many farmers we know across the country and across global, it is not just impacting the crisis we have within the UK, it's globally. Talking to some New Zealand and Australian farmers, they are having the same impacts. And actually, it's not just markets, it's weather, it's climate, it's biodiversity. Our system, our planet is collapsing around us, yet we're not having the leadership from governments and from businesses to deliver the change we want and put those strong processes and practices in place, which then leaves us as farmers really vulnerable in knowing what to do. And then people are taking the wrong choices. I'm talking to many farmers the last few weeks. I even had one Christmas afternoon phone me up and it's like, it's Christmas. But they need help. Many of them are actually taking the wrong choices. They're looking at increasing their production, increasing numbers, upping, because that's where the market is, the commodity price went up. But that only means they're going to be they're stretching their finance stretch. So when the next crisis comes along, they're in an even worse situation. And it's how do we help them balance their production and make the system work.
And interest rates too.
Yeah.
We had this pandemic false dawn, didn't we? Where all of a sudden, everyone out there loved the countryside, wanted to be out there, appreciated the natural environment, and went to their farm shops and queued up, stayed away from the supermarkets. And it was an amazing moment, a moment of community coming together, and perhaps people looked like they might have been voting with their feet. But Phil, was it a permanent change?
Sorry, what was that?
Was it a permanent change?
No. That would have been rather wonderful, wouldn't it?
I think I just want to start. I've been in this particular business for 30 odd years now. This, better food in all its forms. And in all of that time, there's been something that's not been there, which is balance in the market. So throughout that entire period, we've operated at against a market that is ultimately extractive and domineering. So you're always the underdog. You're always your cost effectiveness in terms of what you can supply to the market is always going to be more than what the extractive domineering system asks for of consumers, asks from consumers. And so I think that we can't get away from, the idea of getting through this. I've never seen us get through anything. It's a journey. It's a constant journey. And yes, it goes like this. And the pandemic was quite extraordinary in how it left us all scrabbling around trying to cope with the demand. And so many box schemes, for a start, were turning people away because they literally couldn't deal with it. And managing growth at that stage. And then it just fell off. And that was quite shocking. It's quite shocking for the supply routes, our farmers who are getting geared up for supplying us with yet more product and then being told, sorry, we only need 30% less or whatever it is the months afterwards. So I think that ripple and shock, for us, it started the moment that the pandemic rules lifted back in June 21. And it started to decline then for us. And it went on declining. And then there was the war eventually in March, February, March. And that just put it, really, really put the lid on everything. And it became very evident by that point, where we'd certainly been losing a fair bit of money, that we had to really change our business model, and we had to do it pretty quick if we were going to be in the game for very long. And so that's the stuff that really interests me. When you're in a market, you still have to face the fact that it's an unjust market. It is always in imbalance. And so we did the conventional things that, we cut our team right back. And we looked at our waste and our margins and our electricity costs and all of those things. Where could we save bits here and there? And I'm delighted to say that our team have really responded to this challenge, and we have managed to get ourselves to break even. Now, when I took the reins back on, because in amongst all of that, very sadly, I had to take the reins again as MD of the company. And in amongst that, what I set as a task, okay, it's project break even. This is what every single person in my company had to get behind. And that's what's so wonderful about having the privilege of running a small company, is that when you ask your people to help you out and to get over the danger line, if you like, they really often really do respond, and it's been an honor to watch these teams work really hard to the point where we've managed to break even before I thought we possibly could. But ultimately, it was about cutting the company size down, and that's shocking for people. It really is. Like when your comrade, your colleagues are suddenly not there because they cannot be afforded. There's a sense of ripple of some people feeling you've just cheated some of your team, and it's quite hard to swallow, and yet it's an absolute must. But I think when you go into that with humility and you talk to your teams, they usually, after a while, they will settle down and really get behind it and begin to really understand what's happened. But ultimately, I just want to go back to that imbalance, because I've been saying this for a while, that actually I think we do need a revolution. The system is so broken, as Ollie said this morning, first thing in the open plenary, that the old system is dead and yet it's not gone, and the new system's there but it's not fully born, something to that effect. And it's so right. We're in this weird limbo in the middle, and either things have got to get a lot worse, or we've got to have a revolution to push ourselves over the edge, because we need the numbers of you guys and everybody who's at this conference, and so many hundreds of thousands more, to be celebrated more and to get more traction and more understanding in the marketplace. And when somebody in a previous session this morning said, would you value national campaigning and marketing as much or more than your own local? I was kind of thinking, yeah, well, actually, that's what we need, some really big hitting national campaigns where all the big organizations that represent so many of us, our interests in a better world, come together, pool their money, and really start fighting big and making it clear that enough is enough. We've really got to move on. We've really got to put the soil first and farmers right by that, and be, for us as retailers, us as traders, to be the people who say, what can we do for you? What can we do for the farmers? And I think if we can really reverse that, sometimes I wish at the moment that I went back to being kind of 25 when I started in this game, because I would have a kind of no-holds-barred courage to just go for it. And I'm hoping there's lots of young people who are feeling that way and feeling the kind of that revolution is really needed and there is nothing to lose now, so let's go for it. So that's my kind of message. And just that everything we do as a company now, and it's hard to keep focusing on this because you have all the commercial pressures, but everything we do must come back to climate. How are we addressing climate? What are we doing to reduce our climate impact? Because it's the big thing, isn't it? We all know that. I think that'll do for now.
Yeah, I've got a zillion questions to ask, but let me go to Jade on my right. Jade, when you and I talked on the phone, on Zoom, ahead of this, you said to me, community is the only reason our business survived.
Yes, that's true. So I'm Jade Bashford. I work for the Real Farming Trust, but I'm also one of the owners of Stroud Brewery. Greg's here, he's the MD, give us away. Yeah, so any difficult questions were sent to Greg. I'm going to talk about how our business's role in the community has helped us to weather the storm, have helped us to survive the crisis that have come our way in the last year or two. Can you put my slides on? Is that possible?
Oh,
thank you.
Allow me.
Shall I press the green one? Oh, look at that. Fantastic.
Gotcha.
All right. So I'm going to just illustrate, really, from our particular business, the kinds of ways that participating in your community might affect how you trade. So I'll tell you a bit about the business, I'll introduce the business, and then I'll talk about how it is that we've come to be indebted to the community and how they've kept us out of trouble. All right, so we're a small business. We started in 2006. We had no capital behind us. We'd never run a business before. We'd never made beer before, and it started in a bucket in the kitchen. Now the turnover is about 2 million. We employ about 75 people. The business has got two halves. So half's manufacturing. It makes beer, which goes to pubs, to canning, to wholesale. And the other half is the brewery tap, which is a community centre, venue, cafe and bar. So the sort of social and environmental purpose is really what we're about. It's what we're for. I won't talk so much about the environmental side of the business. I'm going to talk about the community side. But we're 100% organic. The beer's vegan. We use entirely renewable energy. And we're a B Corp. And I should say that we're, in theory, a for-profit. We live in hope. So we're a regular business. We're limited by shares. We're not a community-owned business. We're just a normal business. So here are our principles, which are kind of, we've got a long way to go on all of them, actually, but they're kind of known in Stroud. And people who came into the business as a customer or as a worker would have some sense of what we're trying to do, of what we're for. So these challenges are really normal. They're hardly worth reading out because if you're trading, you'll have faced exactly the same kind of barriers and challenges over the last 2 or 3 years. But as an illustration, I think they're probably quite typical. So our energy costs have gone up from 30,000 to 100,000 a year. And that margin is actually more than our profit the year that that happened. We have to do a lot of heating and chilling. We make beer. We pay the living wage, so that's gone up by inflation, so that's put 35,000 on this year's costs. The inputs have gone up between 10 and 30%, depending on what they are. Our customers are in trouble. We sell to pubs. They're facing all the same kind of issues, and they can't recruit. One of the reasons they can't recruit is because since COVID, everyone's wanted to move to Stroud, and rents have skyrocketed, and you can't live off even our living wage, let alone a minimum wage in Stroud. So we've got loads of people who live in vans who shower at the brewery and use the brewery in the daytime because you can't afford to rent in Stroud anymore. Then we've got Brexit. Nearly all of our trade's local, but we started to explore some export, and Brexit's made that impossible. We can't export the beer at all to Europe anymore. Our suppliers are in the same position, and also we're operating in broken systems. So, you know, someone hurts themselves on a pothole on the way to work, they fall off their bike, and then it takes them 5 weeks to see the physio. Or we need a new component, and it takes 6 weeks to arrive, and everything's broken in the meantime. So it's not only these immediate costs, it's also the fact that we're trying to function in systems that also don't work. All right, so they're the challenges, and they're not very interesting because they're the same for anybody who's trying to trade. I'll talk about how our place in the community really has made it possible to get through. And I'm sure there'll be more. It's chaotic. We don't know what's going to happen next. So we've done the normal kinds of things that all of you have done. We're right on it with the spreadsheets. We've changed what we do. We've diversified. But I'll tell particularly about the community aspect of it. So we're very interested in our part in the community. It's not a marketing gimmick. It's really what we're for. So we're both had a history in the voluntary sector. We both do sort of unpaid community work in our spare time. We like it. We're both really well known in the area. And there'd been other community activity before, and there'd been other community finance. We've been a lot involved in the CSA movement in the area and buying community wood and so on. So we weren't starting from scratch on the trust front. That really matters. 80% of our trade is within 50 miles, so there's lots of other people who know that their finances are affected by whether we're okay or not. That matters to us. The bar's really inclusive. We really go out of our way to make sure, as far as we can, that as many people as possible feel welcome. It's not just for green hippies. And after the last election, like completely by chance, 3 of the different candidates were there with their mates, sort of debriefing after the election, which I thought was great. I didn't vote for all of them, mind you, and I jolly well wouldn't have voted for all of them, but I was really pleased they were there. They were welcome. So we do lots of stuff. It's a warm space. There's all kinds of community stuff going on. And that's the background, really. We wouldn't have done a community finance without all those relationships happening. There's lots of events at the brewery. You won't be able to read all those. So that was just a snapshot of what was happening the day I happened to write the slides that week. So some of those make money, corporate events and weddings. Some of them lose money. A lot of them are free and people just come and use it. And some people run their own events at the brewery and we don't even know what they are sometimes. Sometimes we charge them for rooms, sometimes we don't. So if you can't read it, it's very small. That week there was green drinks, there was a car boot sale, electric bike demo, there were fundraisers, there was a Swift conservation group were meeting. Quite random really, there was a deaf cafe, all different kinds of people were there knitting and this and that. So it's really used. So all of that background is kind of necessary really to why people want the brewery to survive. So the kind of help that comes, I think the stuff that's hard to quantify is actually just as valuable. There's all kinds of informal help. I've put that picture because someone came in and a sort of craftsman made the toilets for us, and then someone else left that little step there for the kids. That wasn't me, I don't know where that came from. And someone came in and made a mural. Every week someone phones us up and offers a piano. Don't offer us your piano, we've got lots of pianos. I'm chucking out a piano, do you want to know? But when we want to recruit someone, word gets round. The van breaks, someone lends us one. All that informal stuff that also matters. But I'm just going to talk about the numbers because that's maybe more important. Don't worry if you can't read it because I've got the same stuff I'm going to tell you. So the community finance has really seen us through, and it's been there from the start. When we began, we didn't have any capital, so the first 13,000, which at the time seemed like an absolutely terrifyingly large amount of money, we borrowed from friends and acquaintances, and we didn't know them all very well. It's kind of someone I'll chat to when I walk down the lane who walks their dog, and it's quite a weighty relationship. We're literally indebted to the local community. Yeah, that really matters. When the numbers don't work, it's that kind of matters first. So then we borrowed another 100,000 for a capital investment project in 2010, and that was at risk, and it was difficult. You know, a lot of people know us, and they'd lent us money at risk so that we didn't have to borrow a house at risk. And that was interest bearing. And so we're quite pleased to pay the interest to local people and not to a dirty bank. That's quite good. Then we borrowed just before everything went bananas. We borrowed another £300,000. We moved into a brand new building, really expensive. We don't own it, massive rent. So during COVID, we had 20% of our normal sales and much more than 20% of our normal costs. And the rent was one of them. So we moved into a new building right before COVID. And for us, it wasn't a wondrous moment, COVID. It was a complete disaster. We weren't trying to sell vegetables, we were trying to sell beer in a bar, and we were trying to sell beer to pubs. No, it's not what you want to be doing during COVID. So we borrowed this £200,000 right before COVID through a scheme administered by Shieldus Bank. That was a community loan scheme. And we couldn't have moved into our new building without that. And then during COVID, we did a crowdfunder, and we really had our backs against the wall by this point. So we borrowed over 100,000, no, it was a crowdfunder at that time. Yeah, so the crowdfunder raised over £100,000, which actually was only a fraction of the cost of COVID to us, but it was what we needed. We wouldn't have survived without it. And the interesting thing about that was that it had over 1,000 supporters, because there were really loads of people in the area who thought they'd be better off if the brewery survived than if it didn't. And I should say we're very rural. We're not even in the middle of Stroud. All this is going on, you know, we're surrounded by fields. So the kind of concluding remarks about all this, I think I've got two things to say about it. One is that all of this happens in a social fabric, really, that the brewery's making social fabric, and it's also held up by social fabric. But so are all the other players in that the individual households also contribute and are to some extent given security or protected by their part in that social network as well. So I think if you're trading, I think it's a very good idea to see your impact on the social fabric of your area as not incidental, whether that's positive or negative or mixed, to actually pay attention to it and to really take responsibility for it, to know what it is, what impact you're having, and then to know that is your responsibility, and maybe even to be held up by it. It might happen. That's what I've got to say about it.
Extraordinary story. The level of trust must be quite humbling.
There's a very deep level of trust, and there's a very deep level of indebtedness, and it's two-way, and I think sometimes that responsible indebtedness is what does build community, taking risks to share that trust and then living up to it, and being transparent about what's happening in the business when it's hard, or where we've had to compromise our ethics to make the numbers stack up. Or that level of trust and participation is really important for our business.
Kim, you didn't start off brewing gin in the bath.
No, we didn't. No. Sometimes I wish we had.
Well, perhaps. Too late now. These vegetable boxes, they're the entry point for so many people new to the kind of how can I get a bit of farming into my life and then monetize it and turn it into a business. I had a call yesterday from someone wanting to buy a piece of land off me, complete stranger. I want to grow a few vegetables, grow some wildflowers for cut flowers. This is my idea. It's still out there as a viable model. But how has that road been for your operation at the community farm?
Yes, so it is an entry point, and as Phil already mentioned and Jade mentioned as well, the 2 years of COVID, served veg boxes really, really well. And so for once in the community farm's journey, there was a real high, and there was this feeling of, you know, local food is the answer, and that's actually what people have been looking for all this time, and they turn to their local food systems when the global food systems and the supermarkets kind of fell apart. And so it really did feel like for that short amount of time, we're there, you know, we've done it.
But it
we've
was
got
a
there.
false dawn. Why?
It was.
Why was it?
Well, I mean, the million-dollar question, I guess. I think there's a lot of reasons, but ultimately, you know, a lot of people who came to us during that time, I guess, were at the entry point of their journey, and perhaps at that point it wasn't quite the right journey for them. And I've been asked here today to talk, you know, not just about the tough times, but about hope, and kind of how we've reacted to it, and what the community farm has done. And really reflecting on that, and Phil mentioned this kind of journey, is it's not just about what's happened in the past 6 months, year, 2 years. It's not just about the cost of living crisis and how we've responded to it. It's not just about COVID and how we've responded to it, because actually what's really important is the whole journey that the community farm has been on, and the very reasons that we exist. You know, we're a value-based organisation, and ultimately that is what has got us through this and what will continue to get us through it. So can I grab the clicker and I'll do my slides that everyone had to wait 5 minutes to be emailed, so I apologise for that. So I better show them, but they're not actually probably worth the wait. So my name's Kim Brooks. I'm the Managing Director of the Community Farm, and so for those of you that don't know it, we are a community-supported agriculture project and a community benefit society, and a 13-acre horticulture organic farm just south of Bristol in the southwest of little old England here for those people globally watching online. So we were started 12 years ago, and as you've already heard, we're called the Community Farm. We are a community-supported agriculture project, and we're a community benefit society. So community absolutely is the heart of everything we do. It's absolutely key to everything we do. And as you'll hear as I kind of go through the story, ultimately it's our community that gave us hope and gave us support and has seen us through what are very, very difficult times, but what are hopefully kind of short-term blips in ultimately what is a much longer journey. Like for all of us up here, you know, we didn't get started in this for the money, we didn't get started in it for short term, like we and everyone here in the room. The reason that we're here is because we believe in the long term, that what we're doing by running community businesses, by running farms that look after the land, that is the long-term future, and it's the only long-term future that we've got. So that was why the community farm was started. Some of the people that started it are here today and in the room, and they were very much activists. So that was 12 years ago. It's before I got involved in the farm, and it was started to provide that alternative, to give that alternative to a global food system that was clearly damaging the planet and damaging people's health. And for the people that started it, what they felt was, you know, they'd been banging on doors, they'd been starting markets, they'd been, you know, shouting from street corners, and ultimately that only does so much. Whereas if you create an alternative and you invite people into that space, that can have an incredible impact. And so, like, you know, Jade started a brewery, the bit of beer in a bath, but ultimately look at all those events that are now happening, and that's not because of the beer itself, and same with us, it's not because of the vegetables we grow, it's because we've created a space and we've welcomed people into that space and welcomed them to get involved in a different food and farming system. So this is our definition of community that you see here, and we've only developed this recently, so this hasn't been there since the start, but it's absolutely built on our values. And what it's recognising is we are no different from the rest of nature, we are no different from the rest of land, we are part of that. And the more that we can recognise it and the more that we can put farmers first, because they're the ones that can help us look after it, that's what's going to help us change our food system. So that's really the core of what we do. We've spent 12 years doing it, and we've been challenging our food and farming system. And like I say, the way that we do that is not by saying that the other way is terrible, but it's by inviting people into a better way. And at the farm, we talk about the tomato moment, and I was talking to somebody about it earlier. And it's that moment where, for a lot of people, they've never had the chance to eat a bit of food that has just been grown, to pick a tomato off a plant. It sounds crazy to a lot of us in the room, but actually people who live in cities and they get their food from the supermarket, or they get it delivered, or it's in packaging and it's processed, that simply is not something they get to experience. And that's why community farms are so incredibly important, and why community businesses are so incredibly important, because it's inviting people back into that space and back into the system, whereas at the moment we've got a system that is very, very disconnected. And lots of people, although all of us are eating, we're not understanding where that food has come from. And so at the farm, we create as many ways as we possibly can to invite people to the farm and to be part of that system. So like you were saying, the veg boxes, they are the entry for a lot of people, and they are what give a lot of strength to our business. And as Phil was saying, retail is very, very fragile, and even in amazing shops like Better Food, where they're very, very different to the big supermarkets and their supply chains are very different, ultimately people are still walking into a retail space. And so Phil was saying, they were feeling the impacts of in June last year. Ours were probably a little bit delayed because veg boxes, they symbolise people buying into a different system and kind of going, do you know what? I hand over my choice of food for the week for my vegetables to somebody else. Just send me a box with what working better with nature and with farming, as opposed to turning up to a shop and buying what they want. So we do veg boxes. You can see there we've got a veg shed on site. It's only open for 4 hours a week on a Saturday at the moment. But Sam, who runs it for us, is here today. And actually we've discovered those 4 hours actually create more income than when it was an honesty system open all week. And I think part of that, again, is connection. By actually having somebody there running it, people can turn up on a Saturday and they enjoy that. They enjoy coming onto the farm and being able to buy vegetables, from a farm site. But lots of other things we do. You can see Ian there, he's our community farmer. So we've always run community farmer days on a Saturday, and they welcome people onto the land, families, all ages, everything. And our volunteers are absolutely key to what we do. We're a volunteer organisation. And so when the summer hit last year and the cost of living crisis hit, and for us, it was really a decline in sales that massively, massively hit us, we went out with honesty, with transparency. We went out to our community and we told them, if you don't support us, we're not going to be here in 6 months' time. And we were very lucky in the fact that all of our community turned round to support us. But that wasn't because of what we did in those few months necessarily. It was because of the foundations that we've built. And so this is just a little bit of a recognition of all of that support that came to us. But like I say, it wasn't because of just what we did and the campaign that we did. It's because we're a community business. People have been with us. They're our shareholders, they're our staff, they're our volunteers, they're our friends, and they are part of what we do, and they want to be part of a better system. So when things get tough, they are there to support us.
Mark Thomas, thank you so much, Kim. You are also there to support farmers. You're the listening ear. We've seen here how very badly needed community engagement can be, but many of the farmers who call your network must be living in really quite terrifying isolation. Is that the primary challenge you think they have at the moment, or what are you seeing out there?
Well, Anita, I think it's one of many challenges. And we've heard today about looking after the land, and we've heard about looking after nature. And if I may, I'm going to continue this theme of looking after people and looking after the community. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark. I'm a staff member with the Farming Community Network, or FCN. And I've been with FCN now for about 5 years. And prior to that, my career was spent in the arable and the agronomy world, so I've worked in farming for all my life. For those who may not be aware, FCN is a charity, and we too are a voluntary organisation, and we exist to help improve the health and well-being of people in farming, but also to provide support and help at times of difficulty. Volunteers are at the heart of what we do. They live and work in farming. They understand the issues, and very importantly, they can relate firsthand to the people who contact us and the sorts of things that they're speaking to us about. And our volunteers talk the language of farming, and that is so important in those very personal, very confidential conversations. We've got one of our volunteers here today, Mark, who's at the back of the room. Do go and say hello afterwards on our little stand. Our volunteers are organised into 30 groups, serving their local communities across 35 counties in England and Wales, and they receive ongoing training, and they're supported by a small staff team. And we also operate a helpline, which is open every day of the year from 7 a.m. through to 11 p.m. And Anita, as you were suggesting, people contact FCN for a wide range of reasons, some of which are general problems that we may all encounter during the course of our lives, and some that are more specific to the farming way of life. Things like financial difficulties, family relationships, physical and mental health problems, challenges around succession, planning for the future, as well as the consequences of animal disease, TB, for instance, and avian influenza. All these and many more issues feature in the calls that our helpline volunteers receive on a daily basis, and most of those calls will have multiple factors attached to them. So the helpline is there to listen and to help people into a calmer and sometimes, if necessary, a safer place, before offering to connect those callers with the local FCN group who can provide ongoing pastoral and practical support. People can also visit our FarmWell website, and that's a free-to-use online resource with information about a wide variety of topics from health and well-being to farm safety and business planning. We work closely with other charities. We'll be hearing in a moment from RABI, and often a multi-agency approach is needed for the cases that we get involved in. And FCN, Jade and Addington together form Farming Help, and Bill Young, CEO of Addington, is here today. Whilst providing support at times of difficulty is a key part of what we do in FCN, we prefer that no one needs to call a helpline due to getting into a crisis. And an increasingly important emphasis for FCN is to seek to try and go upstream of those problems occurring, and to be proactive in our local farming communities to help build resilience, reduce health inequalities, and help people manage through change. I don't regard the number of calls we get to our helpline to be an indicator of success. If anything, it's an indicator of failure. For instance, we would work to connect local farming communities through social and information events to try and help reduce the impact of the isolation that you mentioned, the loneliness and stress that can be part of farming today, particularly amongst those who are the hidden from view and the digitally disconnected. We help to bring health clinics to livestock markets, as farmers rarely have time or indeed the inclination to go and visit their GP surgery. We work with colleges to help prepare young people as they embark on their farming careers, and we encourage people to be active lookouts in their local community, watching for those early signs that a neighbour or a work colleague might be struggling, and to enable some form of earlier intervention before the problems snowball. We help people to consider planning, both for the short and the longer term, and to prepare for living well in later life. And the failure to do that, I have to say, is often a reason for the calls that we receive. We're there for everyone that's connected with agriculture, those who farm, those who work on farms, and those who service and provide service and supplies to farms. So to address the theme of this session, perhaps a bit more specifically, it's clear that right now we've got choppy waters that we have to navigate. The higher costs of living are a challenge for all of us, and obviously the cost inflation for the inputs that farming requires are running at an even higher rate than general inflation. And these are often not recouped by farmers who are the primary producers in a food supply chain, but as such, often unable to influence the output values of what they produce. And this comes on top of the changes to the farm support, the farm subsidy system, that will see progressive reductions in financial support over the next few years, removing what perhaps has been the small level of profit that farming delivers for quite a significant number of businesses. I'm sure agricultural transition will bring opportunity for many. There will be the entrepreneurs, the innovators out there who will see this as an opportunity. But clearly it's going to mean significant readjustment or potentially an exit from the industry for other people. And so what's the role of an organisation like FCN as that storm gathers, that storm approaches? Well, I'd say we will, of course, continue to be there for those that find themselves in troubled waters, offering support and hope via our helpline and through our farming community volunteers. But I think we need to be more than a lifeboat service, much more than that. So we must play our part to help encourage and empower those who are working to adapt their businesses to be relevant to the new regime. We must support those for whom the implications are going to mean significant changes to their lives. And we need to help them to understand their options, identify a path forward that is sustainable and fulfilling. And we need to help those who will leave the industry to do so with some dignity and with future possibilities. So can farming weather the storm? Well, I would say yes, of course it will. It's going to look different, and it's not going to be an easy journey for everyone. But farming will rise to the challenge, as it always has done over very many years. Our industry is at the heart of some really important, critical societal issues: food security, renewable energy, biodiversity, we've heard about today, climate change mitigation, leisure, well-being, and it offers fulfilling and exciting career opportunities. And I think it's important that we remind young people of that opportunity that's there.
I was going to ask you about young people. Can I bring Caron up while you're
Sure.
talking so we have a smooth follow-on from you? But
Sure, yes,
going.
yeah. And I would also come back to community and say you will struggle to find a stronger sense of community in any walk of life. So my message is embrace the change, seize the opportunities, look after yourself and those around you. And remember that asking for help is a strength, it's not a weakness, as we often have been perhaps bred to feel that it is. And be part of the movement to mobilize the life experience and the knowledge and care that exists in every local farming community to connect and support each other through this time. And I just finally say, if I may, if you know someone who may benefit from talking to FCN, please do encourage them to get in touch with us. The phone number's there. We've also got these cards on our table at the back of the room. I hope you never need one, but please do take one. You might come across someone who could benefit from that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening.
Thomas, thank you. Caron, Whaley, I didn't realise till I peered at your slide presentation that the Royal Agricultural Benevolent Institution has been around since 1860. So help for farmers and acknowledgement that sometimes it's pretty shit out there is not a new phenomenon. But there must be a new level of urgency now with what you're having to deal with.
Yeah, so first of all, can everybody hear me? Yep, perfect. Yeah, 160 years. And unfortunately, going back to kind of Mark's point, there's more demand than any of the support organisations can actually provide, which is, we'd all like to be out of business. I mean, that's the reality. even though we've been around for a very long time, most people have never heard of us. I grew up in farming, I'd never heard of RABI, I'd never heard of FCN, and yet there's a massive need of demand out there. I'm going to ask for the clicker. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit more of a deep dive into, into the human element. We've had community mentioned, we've had people mentioned, we've had farming people mentioned. And what I wanted to do today was just kind of share with you a bit more of a look under the hood of that. What is going on out there? And what can we do to kind of provide support and hope? So back in 2020, we decided we were going to stop guessing. And what we did was we put out a survey to farming people. We wanted to know about their health and well-being and how the challenges were affecting them. And we were absolutely delighted that we got over 15,000 respondents. We got a fantastic demographic of responses in terms of age, farming type, areas, and we support farming people across England and Wales, and that was covered in the survey. What the survey allowed us to do was think about where have we got gaps in the service that we provide. We've been around for 160 years, but what else is needed? So what I wanted to do was just share a little bit with you of some of the findings from that. So this is one of the questions that we had. How good is the mental well-being of farming people? And if you were given these three options of the amount of people in the farming community that have poor mental well-being, would you go A, 13, B, 23, or C, 36%? I have to be honest, I went with A. Farming people are unbelievably resilient. I come from farming stock myself, so I thought that this was going to be round about 13%. Unfortunately, over a third of people in farming were showing that they were possibly or probably depressed. Not just having a bad day, but possibly or probably depressed when you score them on a clinical scale. That's a pretty shocking figure. Conversely, only 8% of women were saying that they thought they had good mental well-being, and only 12% of men were also saying that they had good mental well-being. We knew that there were some issues that needed support, but we were really saddened to kind of see this. The other question, if we're talking about depression, let's talk about anxiety. So what are the levels of anxiety that we were seeing from our respondents? A, 15%, B, 30%, or a catastrophic 47%. Again, because I got it super wrong the first time, I kind of went with B. And I was wrong. Almost half of the people who replied to our survey said that they were struggling with anxiety. Again, not just having a bad day, but consistently struggling with levels of anxiety. The other finding that we found was that the general mental well-being in the farming population is worse than the general UK population from the survey results. So again, this was really concerning for us. So what could we do to support people? Because we weren't offering any kind of support in these areas. So what we did between 2021 and 2022, we launched 3 new services. A professional in-person counselling option, no GP referral needed. You can just ring up, get access to a professional counsellor who is farming focused. All of our counsellors have had some training in understanding the farming landscape. We also launched what we're calling our Click and Chat. So Click and Chat, which allows people who don't potentially want to talk to someone or see them face to face, because we're aware that this can be really challenging, you know. Farming people are not well known for talking about their feelings, right? So where else could they go to get some support? So we launched a Click and Chat. And then the third one, and Mark kind of alluded to this before, was how do we help our community to kind of support itself? How do we normalize the conversation? We've all seen people that are struggling, but we don't quite know what to say to them. So maybe we just don't say anything. And what we wanted to do was help people start that conversation, not become counsellors, but start that conversation so that they could open the door for someone who was really struggling. And if they needed to be signposted towards professional support, that was also part of that training. So when we launched that first service, we predicted, the one in yellow, if you're colorblind, the one in the top left corner, we predicted probably that 20 people per year were going to use that service. And actually what we found is about 20 people per month are coming through and using that service, and we have not been heavily promoting it because last year was the launch, and it was, let's just see how we go with this. The other thing that we did last year was we ran a couple of cost of living campaigns. So we ran a fuel poverty campaign, and we ran what we called our return to school. So with regards to our fuel poverty, these were the 4 areas that we saw the greatest uptake, and over 50% of the grants went to those 4 counties. I can say counties in this one because we've got Carmarthenshire in there. But we saw real demand for that cost of living grant. We subsequently ran our return to school, and similarly, those are the 4 key areas that took over a third of the grants. We launched this in July. It went out at 4 times the expected demand level that we were expecting. And in the end, we capped the campaign at 1.5 million. We could have kept going. It would have been very easy for us to support people who were contacting us, and I think this campaign would have quite happily run out to £2 or £3 million. And again, this just really demonstrated the support that was needed. 99% of the people that came forward for this were working farmers, and 90% of them were new to RABI. So these weren't existing people that knew about us. These were people who said, hey, I've just realized I need some support, and there's an organization out there that can help me. And so that's what happened. The other thing that we saw at this time was there's a 400% increase in our mental health uptake of our services. We don't know it was the same people coming to us for return to school because it's a confidential service, but what we know is that 80% of them were females. So we can make an estimate that actually, as a consequence of that campaign, we saw a big uptake in our mental health service as well. So that suggests an ever-growing need for both financial support, mental health support, kind of going back to Mark's comment before, that holistic support of the people at the very heart of farming. And that's what we're here, along with all the other organizations, and unfortunately, there is more demand than we can furnish. But if we can be support to people you know, as I said, I grew up in farming, never heard of FCN, never heard of RABI, never heard of Addington. Lots of people out there do not know there are support organizations available to them. Then I urge you to help people contact us. And in particular, if they don't want to talk to someone, there's our fantastic click and chat option where they can get online, access a counsellor 24/7, and there's instant access there between the hours of midday and I think 11 p.m. at night. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Can I offer you a seat?
You could.
Right, well, you come over here because we need to take some questions from the floor, so I'll swap over with you. Phil, it's been in the back of my mind since you spoke earlier on. Before we get into questions from the floor, can I just ask you, sort of ad hoc market research, what do you think is behind the fickleness of your customer base? I'm not blaming the customer here, but, they're all over you like a rash, and then they weren't.
First of all,
so what is it they understand they're buying into?
Yeah, they're most certainly not fickle. I think our customers are unbelievable champions, and I'm a lot of gratitude towards them. I think, you said why? Why has this happened? Well, I think actually some of this lies with the pandemic, and then what the media did during the pandemic and after the pandemic. We were told during the pandemic to be fearful, to lock ourselves down, to not go near people, to wear masks, to hide. And it was over and over and over again. And I think it really got into the psyche of us. And I think when the cost of living crisis started, I think the media got into this thing of telling, doing Voxbox stuff about how terrible it all was and how nobody would be able to afford this and how mortgage was going to do this and that. And so I think we were kind of ready to put the barriers up quite quickly and ready to be fearful. So I think part of it, I'm not blaming the media as such, but I think there was a bit of a feeding frenzy, which really didn't help people feel confident about staying the course or sticking with. The other thing I would like to say about the spike, let's not underestimate that some of that spike was driven because they wanted food. It wasn't just because they wanted organic food or they wanted a box. They had time on their hands, so they could be a little bit more broad in their outlook. But also the queues at the supermarkets were hideous. The volume of stuff on the shelves was often depleted, whereas somebody like ourselves with shorter supply chains, we had much better stocking rates than a lot of supermarkets. So I think it was an obvious no-brainer. Oh, where am I going to go to get my food? I'm not queuing for an hour and a half there. I only want a basket that's 30 quid or whatever. I know, I'm going to try this place. And they enjoyed it. But actually, they also realized, like it or not, was that they were paying, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% more for going into an independent retailer than they were from going to Aldi and Lidl. And the other peculiar thing that I still can't really get my head round is that, and I do use this word advisedly, the middle classes, it's a hell of a bold, broad statement, but I'm being kind of a bit cheeky, seem to have got a real sense of pride in using Aldi and Lidl and saving money. I've spoken to so many families where they're actually, do you know what, we managed to save this much. And they're the people who understand what's going on more than many and have the resources to stick with the box scheme, to stick with the farmer, to stick with the independent retailer. And yet they still find a pride. So there's a whole lot of layers of what's going on.
It's very illogical, all over the place.
Yeah.
As a farming colleague of mine said today to me, it's pretty tough standing out there in the field trying to make the organic farming business work while watching, shall we borrow something from you, the middle classes start flying from Gatwick Airport overhead, when they should also be the people who understand that flying more than anything is one of the drivers of global warming. And yet the dots aren't being joined still because the message isn't getting through, and that's something that more than one of you has touched on today. We should take some questions from the floor, and we also have, Dewey Hester, some questions from online at some point. Well, let's do, who out there wants to ask a question to the panel?
Online first?
Why not, if you've got one there, Hester?
Well, this follows on quite directly from what you just said, Phil, actually, so I'll go with this one from Gordon Rennie, and perhaps the whole panel could answer it. Aldi sales in December increased year on year by 28%. In the cost of living crisis, does the panel believe Aldi are part of the solution, or are they the villains squeezing farmers?
Well, which of you wants to pile in first? Phil, you were just talking about Aldi, so you better pick up where you left off.
So if one of my staff members, team members, is behind a till for, let's say, 3 hours, what goes through that till in comparison with what goes through an Aldi or Lidl till is probably about 5–10%, if you're lucky. If you look at the working conditions of people, and I know a few people who've worked for us who have also worked for Aldi and Lidl, if you look at the working conditions, how hard they're pushed and driven to the point where they don't feel human, the writing's on the wall. They're not part of the solution. They're part of the industrial food system, which is broken, really.
It's funny you're reflecting on the middle classes. I think I had to live with my parents, and apologies if my mother ends up watching this. But So I ended up for the first time in however many years, we're back and we're cooking together. And she turns to me and she says, well, what do you and your partner eat during the week? And I thought, actually, how do I convey this to her? My mum's of the generation where she absolutely adores the supermarket. Absolutely, she has a loyalty to one supermarket, but likes, dipping her toe in another one and then talking about it. Because, for her, actually, as a housewife cooking meals for ungrateful people, the supermarket for her is the place where she's gone, and it's bright lights and it was exciting and all this wonderful, food and then processed food, and it was all convenient and everything made easier. And I agree, that system is broken. And when people go to the supermarket, a lot of what they buy, isn't food, actually. But ultimately, the supermarket has done incredibly clever things. When you think about how fast food gets from one place to the other, they're so clever because they've got all of the money and all of the power and all of the control. And back to your question about, are our customers fickle? No, they're not. They're just not obsessed with food and farming like we are. I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is what am I going to eat? And it's the last thing I think about at night. And when I think about it, I'm not thinking about, what's that package something or other I can get? I'm thinking about where has it come from? Who's grown it? Because to me, that's fascinating. To most people, that is not fascinating. Sorry, guys, it's just not. For most people, they are fascinated and they're passionate about other things and they're busy and they go to work and they look after their kids and all those things. And for them, food is just fuel, and so they go to the loudest, most convenient place, which is the supermarket. And so what they are eating is driven by the supermarket. So is the supermarket part of the problem? Yes, because ultimately they're the providers of our food. Can they also be part of the solution? Yes, I'm afraid to say it, but they can be, because they are also people thinking about food and farming from morning until night. And so they can be part of the solution, but they need to wake up to what is better farming, what does that mean, and how do we continue eating in such a way that is good for people and planet. And I believe us have those answers, and that's why there's an organic movement, and they said it was hippies and all that sort of thing, but now actually government advisors and policy, they're listening to those hippies because they're experts in the soil. So we don't need to give up hope because they will listen to us.
I can answer that as well. I think we don't actually have a cost of living crisis, we've got an inequality crisis. And if food prices have gone up by 10%, that's a disaster if you're spending 30% of your income on food. But for a lot of people, a 10% increase in food prices, they don't even notice. So I don't think the answer to food poverty is food banks or providing poor quality or environmentally damaging food. The answer in the long term is to address the inequality in the first place. In the meantime, we need food banks, but we shouldn't do, and neither Aldi nor the food bank is the solution to the problem.
Thank you, Jade. Questions from the floor? Aha. Microphone coming to you.
Thank you. All absolutely fascinating. And I have to say, I apologise. In Aldi, I went in mainly to buy some wine because I let out an expletive when I saw that carrots and shallots and parsnips were 20p a bag. That's the question was really, I think you're right that supermarkets be part of the solution, but I think that the issue is that their citizens, their shoppers, their food buyers need to demand it. The stories that Jade and Tim, you said about your community, do you have any correlational link between the individuals within your communities who understand the work you're doing, who are engaging with the amazing stuff you're doing within the brewery, who visit the farm, who buy from you, who are more resilient to those changes? Are they more loyal? Are they buying more from you? Does that level of understanding keep them coming back, or is it quite separate to that, and they're still making those decisions to go to Aldi or to Lidl and to show off about the amount they're saving? I mean, how can we learn about those correlations to kind of drive more loyalty and more purchase along those areas?
Do you want to answer that, Greg? You get to go.
Does anyone want to address any points? Right, oh, I see.
Hi there. Hi.
Okay, right.
I'm going to try and answer that, and actually it's very difficult. When Jade was talking about our customers and our supporters, often they are supporters of our venue, and they see the role that our venue and our community centre has to them. It's quite different about the ingredients and the provenance that necessarily go into our food and our offerings. And there's a sense of it, and they are grateful for it, but I don't think even they really understand the real depth and issues that we might understand as brewery or food retailers. So that is our challenge, is ever our challenge, is trying to communicate, again, those stories, the provenance, the people that make the food in our cafe, and we never do enough of it.
Yeah, I think maybe sometimes the opposite thing happens. People come in because they want to play table football, and they go out with a little bit more of a sense of why organic matters. Sometimes that happens that way around.
I think I would add as well, one of the things that we definitely learned was, like I say, it's not like we ran a campaign and suddenly we got new customers or whatever. I think what the campaign did and what we were really careful about was being super, super clear and super, super transparent about what we needed. And actually somebody said to me the other day what they found so useful was we actually gave a list of bullet points of like, this is how you can help. And I think in answer to your question, customers need to be reminded, our community still need to be reminded, we need you. You know, we're still very, very small, and ultimately we need you in order to be louder than the supermarkets, and we still need you to shop with us. You know, like actually when times get tough, and they're making tough decisions themselves, and they're thinking, oh, do we go elsewhere? They need to be reminded, please don't go elsewhere, because we will not survive. We do not have the staying power and the cash reserves that the big guys have. But being reminded of that and just telling them, you know, actually these are the simple ways you can do it. And the other thing you mentioned was buying more. And that was one of the things we said, you know, actually just, you know, buy an extra bag of potatoes or an extra can of tomatoes, because actually for us, that makes a massive difference. And again, it was just kind of a little switch went on for some people, and they were like, oh, yeah, okay, actually I get my veg box, I could actually get those other things. So little simple reminders work really well.
Anyone else on the floor with a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, as everybody's been agreeing, there's a sort of audience, like, and we're the audience, we've got the, you know, preaching to the choir thing. And I'm wondering about the engagement of young people. I mean, it's quite easy bringing kids on farms, they love them, the animals, that, you know, all that. But I'm wondering more about, you know, as they get a bit older, you know, whether, I mean, there's a farm near us, isn't there, where there's sort of teenagers who aren't quite, you know, can't quite fit in, aren't finding their way through the academic system, who are working on various farms with vegetables, where they have a need for, you know, hands to harvest the vegetables and so forth. But I think there's one of them where he's actually associated with parties in the woods. I mean, I'm not saying we should all do parties in the woods, but I'm just thinking we've got to think a bit about how to engage young people, and I'm just wondering what's going on at the moment around that. I mean, obviously with the brewery it's obvious, but otherwise.
Anyone got any thoughts? Leap in if you do.
Yes, I mean, from the community farm perspective, we have lots of ways that we work with kids of all ages. So we have like a toddler group come in. In the past, we've worked with, you know, like you say, young people who might be suffering with problems or come from disadvantaged areas. And we've had partnerships in the past, and we're just about to start a new one with the local school. And I think it's, you know, it's absolutely vital. I didn't come from a food and farming background, and I found myself eventually at the Royal Agricultural University, and that was kind of my first experience of food and farming in education. But somebody said it earlier, you know, we need our children to be thinking about food and farming and having access to it from, you know, from day dot and all throughout their lives, because it's an absolutely fascinating world to be part of, and there's so many opportunities, really positive ones, to be part of. So there's lots of work being done, but yeah, not enough, I'd say.
Mark Thomas?
Yes, I was just going to say there's a wonderful charity called the Country Trust who take children onto farms. There's a number of organisations like that who are doing great work to demonstrate to children how their food is produced, the care that's taken with it. I guess from an industry point of view, I'm always very concerned when talking about the work of FCN and the area that we're involved in is that it can appear quite bleak sometimes. Your first question was about isolation today. And it does worry me that we need succession. We need young people. We need young blood coming into this industry. We need to remind those young people of the opportunities that exist. This is a fantastic industry to work in. It's high tech. It's going to become even more high tech. There's science, there's community, there's everything. And I think another area that we need to encourage is the young farmers clubs who did have a tough time during the pandemic, and really getting them re-engaged again, supporting them. So
yeah, point well made. Yes. Oh, hang on. You've been bypassed. We'll come to you afterwards.
Thanks very much. Just a very quick comment I wanted to add. I'm Julia from Better Food Traders, different from Phil from Better Food. We are a UK-wide network and we support food traders. So it's been amazing to see the work that you're doing with FCN and RABI. I suppose I just wanted to give a shout out that we exist for anyone who's trading customer focused, and we offer support as well. So particularly in the sort of customer focused areas of marketing, customer retention, that kind of thing. So if anyone's interested, come and talk to me at the end.
Thank you. Question down the front here.
Thank you, Anita. Bill Young from the Addington Fund, one of the other national farming charities as well. So I'd like to congratulate you all on some great presentations today. I confess I'm guilty as charged in that I'm middle class and shop in Aldi. But I do have some friends who actually supply Aldi, and this is just as an aside, and they have switched from the other branded supermarkets because they think they get a better deal, which is quite interesting. So I would ask you to think about that. But my question is mainly to Caron on the big farming survey. Now, I've been dealing with farmers for over 40 years, and most farmers to me are happy-go-lucky. They love the job they do. Now, your big farming survey, I saw one farming headline which said 30% of all farmers depressed. Now, that's a very strong word and not something I concur with. Were they just having a bad day at the time when they filled in the survey, and perhaps that's why they filled in the survey, and do you think it's totally representative of the farming industry?
I mean, it's representative of the 15,000 people that did the survey. So, you know, you've got to put that in context. Of those 30 people, they were scored on a scale that is for testing levels of depression. This wasn't just, have you had a bad day, tick 1 to 10. You know, there was a comprehensive questioning. So the results were reviewed by Exeter University, and the findings were provided through them so that they had some validity. What I would say is, horses for courses, you could argue that the people that responded to the survey were the people that were struggling, so they're not necessarily representative. What I would say is that was 2020, and I think the last couple of years have been tough for farming. So I think it's a conservative estimate in terms of there are potentially people struggling. It is an environment where people are incredibly robust, and not a community that necessarily talks about those difficulties that they're facing. I think for us, I think for FCN, I think for Addington as well, part of the battle is normalizing the conversation. So the figure, to be honest, to a certain extent, is just a figure. What's important is that if people are struggling, A, they know where to go for support, and B, that you of the farming community know how to have those conversations to help people get support. And I think that's the bigger thing for me. The point of the figures was to kind of make us all just take a moment and go, wow, actually maybe there is something that we need to think about here in terms of physical health, mental well-being. These are the people at the core of farming. And if they are not doing well, then farming is in trouble. So take it in the context of whatever you will. It's in terms of the 15,000 respondents, yes.
There's one more online question.
One more question, burning, and then we need to. I'd like some quick closing thoughts to finish this, but please
yes,
go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. Really interested to hear the comments from the panel, but my first question is what their predictions are for the next 12 months in terms of whether they're going to change their marketing policies or what their feeling is regarding how their business is going to be positioned going forward for the next 12 months.
Well,
and my other question, just to add to that, sorry, is the mileage in linking high quality organic food to health, and is that something that you think might be worth driving a little bit more?
You, oddly enough, have anticipated what I was going to wrap this discussion with. If I can annex your question a bit, it would be to say, taking into account those very good points raised by this gentleman here, and we have to be quite brief on this, I'm going to go through all of you, because I'm aware that it's a while since we've heard from you as well. If there was a tool you could use, a public information campaign, a change in legislation, a change in the educational curriculum that put all children through a period of farming during their education, I don't know, changes to rebalance the employment market or the way that food is sourced to load, well, let's not go down the tariff route, but if there was something you could use to tweak the situation, move it forward, create that revolutionary movement that you say we need, what would it be? Can we start with you?
What is put food back on the educational system. Food starts, we've lost our connection with how we handle, prepare, deal with food, cook food. We just accept it in packages. Unless we comes back into the educational system and encourage people to know how to prepare and handle good food and where that food comes from, the effect it's had in a positive or negative way within our communities and in our landscape, that is where it should really start, and that will take time. So that's the starting point, but we need to add the other bits in to make sure people understand where their food comes from and that dietary choice and the ability to feed ourselves nutritionally rather than just volume of food.
So health, as this gentleman mentioned, is a crucial part of it. Health education needs to change from Tim Spector onwards.
We've got a society, we're just stuffing ourselves full of calories and just sugar and stuff that we don't really want or shouldn't have. We need some government to step up and actually put some of that healthcare in and some rules and regulations to move the dietary choice that we have and actually enforce some of those rules.
Jade, what would be your revolutionary tool of leverage?
I think what I'd like to see most is food systems, including farming and processing and retailing, in the hands of the people who are affected by the outcomes of that we're the stakeholders in that, and if, as far as possible, we can have businesses like Kim's or Phil's or ours, then of course we make choices about how to run those systems that look after our health and look after the places that we live in. But if the food system is controlled by enormous corporates who extract cash to pay their shareholders, of course everything underneath is trashed.
Caron.
Yeah, just going back to that question about health. We know that good mental health is correlated with positive business. So again, if we can support health, both physical and mental health in the community, that for us this year is certainly something we'll be consolidating.
Kim?
Three things. The first two are going to be obvious for me. Community-supported agriculture projects, make sure everyone has access so that they can be part of it, then they will be part of a better food and farming system that they understand. Veg boxes, they actually can change your life, everyone needs to get one. And public procurement, if the government put their money where sometimes their mouth is and made better food part of hospital schools, then we'd be well supported as farmers.
Mark?
We need a significant increase and uplift in the engagement and the communication about the implications of the loss of the BPS and what options people have.
Phil, you get the last word.
Education, of course, and listen to young people. I think the frame that a lot of young people in this movement and a lot of thinking young people have is very different to a lot of us, and I don't think we're hearing it well enough. I think we need to adapt and welcome a different culture almost from the younger generations.
My thanks to the panel. We have to wrap at this point, but we haven't actually concluded the discussion. Aware as we were that some of you might want to take this further, there will be a secondary you called it a clinic, didn't you, Hester, in the St Aldates Room, which is through there and a bit that way, yeah, at 4 o'clock. So those of you who haven't felt they got their questions addressed or who want to explore some more of the expertise that these people all offer here can meet with them in person, one-on-one, at 4 o'clock in the St Aldates Room. Otherwise, thank you very much. What a comprehensive bunch of